The warning signs keep piling up for the greater Boston economy, especially for our third largest economic sector, the tourism and hospitality industries. Now, the head of the region's top business group is speaking to our political analyst John Keller about what needs to happen for the golden goose to thrive again. Here's their conversation.
It feels like the hits just from inflation driving up costs, to the shortage of the workforce shortages, to the dire numbers about how the hotel industry has taken a hit, and now the governor's the McKinsey report that the governor put out. It just feels like the hits keep on coming.
Yeah, John, there's certainly some challenges that we're experiencing now and on the horizon, frankly. For the short term, certainly the next couple of years in terms of dealing with a post-pandemic economy in all the categories you talked about. Worker shortages are certainly an issue for the business community, and this inflation number that we saw come out for the month of May is certainly something the business community will keep an eye on.
Let me start with the governor's future of work report. They forecast, correct my numbers if I'm wrong, I don't have it in front of me, but like a 10 to 15% drop in Logan traffic. What did you make of that? I know not everyone is sort of buying those findings. How about you?
Yeah, I think that it's one report, one piece of useful information to digest. Interestingly, almost concurrent with the release of that report, Bloomberg issued a report that said that they expect business travel to come back more rapidly than perhaps was expected before. The president of Delta Airlines said he expects business travel to be back by mid-2022. So there's a lot of conflicting data and information coming out. If you look at the governor's report, they used a lot of qualifiers. They used terms like may and could quite a bit. And that's okay because we all have to manage in a way that tries to prevent those things from happening.
Now, first of all, my numbers may be out of date. Last time I looked, tourism was what, our second biggest?
Yeah, third largest employer.
Third largest employer. Put this in perspective. What's at stake here if we don't bounce back to where we were before COVID?
Yeah, the greater Boston hotel industry was one of the hardest hit during COVID in the United States, second only to San Francisco's marketplace, and is now among the slowest to bounce back. A couple of things are at stake. As you know, John, there's a lot of spin-off effect from business travel, conventions, meetings, tourism that comes into Boston, and restaurants and tourist attractions and the like. And if that's not happening, those other businesses aren't doing well. On top of that, as we said, hospitality and tourism is the third largest employer, but it is really the largest employer of people of color and immigrants. And we see in the unemployment data that those segments are still trailing. They have the highest unemployment numbers. So what's at stake in terms of getting back faster in our hospitality and tourism industry is giving people of color, giving immigrants some sign of hope that their jobs are going to come back. There's still hotels closed. The Sheraton Boston, one of the largest, is still closed down, and the numbers just aren't back to support it.
What do you believe can be done to help us snap back at the federal level, at the state and local level, in the private sector itself?
Yeah, well, let's start at the federal level, John. I think part of the reason for the inflation are supply chain issues. Anyone who is thinking about buying a car knows about the semiconductor and chip shortages. There's other types of supply chain issues that are affecting business that occurred during COVID, and we have to get out of that. One issue is we got to double down, particularly on West Coast, but what East Coast too, ports, and try to just get things flowing in more. We have to get materials and supplies like that into the country. We have to revisit the Trump era tariffs. The price of steel has gone up threefold in the last 6 months. Aluminum is up, lumber is up. So some of these tariffs aren't helping America and Americans and are contributing to this inflation. So those are just examples on the federal level. On the state level, we have to use the money, this new money, $5 billion, in a way that is not just relief and putting more money in people's pockets to save or to spend, contributing to inflation further. We have to think about investments, and we have to think about targeted relief. Things like drug abuse programs. We saw just today a report released that there's a 30% increase in overdoses in the United States during the COVID period. So be very targeted. Don't just put relief money in people's pockets. The savings rate went up tremendously during COVID. And now one of the reasons for inflation is people have pent up money and demand that they're spending, thus contributing to the inflation as well. So use money at the government level, particularly the state level, for targeted investments. And I think that will go a long way.
Well, there's a bit of a spat now between the governor and the legislature over how to use the $5+ billion that we're getting from the feds. The governor really wants to put close to half of it into housing, hundreds of millions into worker retraining. And that's another thing. The Future of Work report came out. It suggested massive job dislocation going forward. And also he wants to put it into services for particularly stressed communities. Are you with him on that? Do those ideas, is that what you're talking about, or are you proposing something else?
No, I think that the categories are right. Certainly housing was a crisis pre-COVID, and it's exacerbated during COVID. But also the workforce training, reskilling, again, another issue before COVID that has become worse. We know that. We know that employers, particularly in our white collar, white coat industries, biotech, life sciences, financial services, technology, they need workers, and they need programs that enable that supply of the workforce to continue to grow and be reliable over time. We're going to have to lean into that. I do hope that, as you said, the conversations between the legislature and the governor are productive. I hope that they set something of a deadline for themselves and don't wait to program all $5 billion before they release some of that money. I'd like to see them identify urgent issues, and I'll come back to the issue of overdoses and drug abuse. Workforce training certainly is an urgent issue. Let's get something done in the next 3 months. And then if there's more to debate about what programs in housing should we fund, have that debate maybe in a phase 2. But let's put some of that money to work in a targeted investment way that does not just put relief money in people's pockets, unless they're certainly at the bottom, like maybe some of those hospitality industry workers that we talked about that are really suffering and still on the sidelines.
So I hear you saying, in your usual diplomatic way, to government at both the federal and state level, let's go. Let's pick up the pace. There's really no time to waste here.
Yeah, there is an urgency to the moment, but there's also a hunger, I think, within certainly Massachusetts, but more broadly across the country for demonstration that federal and state government can get the job done and rise to the challenge. It should not be business as usual. As you started this conversation highlighting all of the major challenges that we're facing coming out of this pandemic period. So it calls for, or it demands, and Americans and the business community in particular want to see some signals that there can be urgency, that there can be compromise, that there can be collaboration, and that government can get the job done. There's a big hunger for that.
So if the infrastructure talks in DC should collapse or the Beacon Hill remains gridlocked, that would be a big red flag for you?
Huge red flag. John, you and I were young men when infrastructure talks on a federal level started. We've been waiting decades for a major infusion of infrastructure money across the country. That's an example of investment that I've been talking about that the federal government can put to work. And look, there's people on the left and people on the right that are debating how big should this be? What is infrastructure? There's a compromise in play. A group of Republicans and Democrats got together, said, we can live with this. And we can also talk about the other things you want to do. And by the way, we support a lot of those things, investments in childcare and so-called maybe soft infrastructure. But let's deal with the real infrastructure now. There's a compromise on the table. Get the job done. And as important, as I said, as the content of that legislation is, it's the demonstration to American people that Washington can work, because their confidence numbers are very low right now.
I've learned over the years, we get the government we deserve. Government ultimately kind of reflects us, we the people. And are there aspects of COVID era human behavior, or what you're seeing right now, that need to change to help us regain our full economic health here? One area that springs to mind is vaccinations. We're one of the most thoroughly vaccinated states in the country, but what was the latest? Pushing 75%. That still leaves a quarter of our population unvaccinated. Is that a concern to the chamber?
Well, it is a concern. We're happy that Massachusetts is among the leading states in the country for vaccination rates. It is disheartening to see what's going on in other parts of the country, and it's something like a vaccination, a medical cure and miracle in some regards, could be politicized the way that it is. It's befuddling to think that would become a political issue.
And bad for business too, right?
Well, absolutely bad for business. It creates a lot of uncertainty about, at a retail level and in an office environment or other environments. How do you open up? How do you treat people? Who is going to be the enforcement officer in a retail establishment or in an office setting when there's sort of different opinions about vaccinations and people wearing a mask and social distancing and the like? I do hope, John, to your point that I don't know if it's going to get over quickly. I hope it does. That we put all of that kind of thinking behind us and start rowing in the same direction. But that's a big challenge. You don't need me to tell you that this country is as divided as it's been in my lifetime, certainly, and we got to find ways to get back together.
Governor Baker has proposed scrapping the tax-free shopping weekend in August and doing a 2-month tax holiday. Good idea? Bad idea?
Clever idea. Maybe the best way to describe it. Look, I think that the tax-free weekend is probably enough. To the question earlier about inflation and what are the elements that drive inflationary spending, it is increased demand. We know that there's excess savings in this country from people that could afford to save. And part of the drive is post-pandemic spending that has started to occur in May and June and into July. You start inducing more of that spending, and perhaps you're inducing continued levels of inflation. So I think that the demand is already there and probably does not need to be induced any further.
Can we close with a direct message from you to our viewers? What can they do, our viewers who rely on a thriving local and regional economy, and Boston is the main driver of it, for their job security, for their incomes, for their well-being? Many of them are business people. What can our viewers do to move this ball down the road?
Yeah, I think beyond, our earlier conversation about finding ways to come together and perhaps being empathetic and listening to each other better. I think we as a society in this world in which technology is driving change so rapidly, I think we have to be a little more intentional about being lifelong learners, about learning the new ways that business is being done. One phenomenon coming out of COVID is the growth in the levels of e-commerce, for example, that's being conducted. We think about it in terms of Wayfair and Amazon type of behavior, but think about everything that you do, whether it's medical, financial, with your banking institution, interactions with government. It's all online now. So people just have to embrace the fact that they have to learn the new ways that life is lived, commerce is conducted, the way we interact with each other. So I'd say, embrace lifelong learning and reskilling and retooling yourself to be valuable in the workplace in particular, but also that all contributes to your pursuit of happiness as well.
Change doesn't always come easy for people, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. I mean, John, I'd never heard of Zoom 16 months ago, but now it's back to back to back.
Really appreciate you fitting me in. Let's stay in touch, please.
Yes, John. Good to see you.